Spotify has paid the music industry $70 billion since it launched. $11 billion of that was in 2025 alone, the largest annual music payment in history. The music industry almost refused to let Spotify exist. Understanding why they changed their minds and what it cost is one of the most instructive business negotiations of the century. To understand why Spotify's licensing deals were so difficult, you need to understand how badly the music industry had been burned. In 1999, Napster launched. Within 18 months, it had 80 million users sharing music files for free. The music industry panicked, sued Napster out of existence, and spent the next decade fighting a war it could not win. The numbers were devastating. Global recorded music revenue peaked at $27 billion in 1999. By 2014, it had fallen to $14 billion. More than half the industry's revenue, gone in 15 years. The labels had tried everything. They sued individual file sharers, they lobbied for stronger copyright laws, they launched their own digital services that almost nobody used. Apple's iTunes helped, but selling songs for 99 cents was not the same as selling albums for $15. Then, in 2006, a 23-year-old Swedish programmer named Daniel Ek approached Universal, Sony, and Warner with a proposal they had every reason to reject. He wanted to give music away for free. Ek's pitch was simple and radical: make music free, with ads, and charge for a premium version without them. The labels heard, another Napster, but with a lawsuit waiting for a reason to happen. The negotiations took 2.5 years. Ek and co-founder Martin Lorentzen invested their own money to fund the company while they negotiated, because no investor would touch a company without licensing deals, and no label would sign a licensing deal without seeing a working product. Ek has described the period as close to impossible. The labels wanted guarantees Spotify could not yet give. They wanted minimum payments, equity stakes, advance payments, audit rights, and the ability to terminate the deal if Spotify's performance fell below certain thresholds. The answer: they had no better option. By 2008, when Spotify launched in Europe, the music industry was still losing revenue every year. The label's own digital experiments had failed. iTunes was helping but not enough, and piracy was still rampant. Ek's argument was not "this will make you rich," it was "this is better than the alternative." The alternative being continued decline. Universal, Sony, and Warner signed. They also negotiated equity stakes in Spotify, meaning they would benefit not just from royalties but from the company's eventual value. The labels received approximately 15 to 20% of Spotify's equity at launch. When Spotify went public in 2018, that equity was worth billions. The most controversial element of Spotify's model, the free tier, is also the most financially important. Every music industry executive who signed the original deal hated the free tier. Why would anyone pay when they could listen for free? Ek's answer: because the free tier is how you beat piracy, not subscriptions. Piracy is free, immediate, and has no ads. To compete with it, Spotify needed to offer something equally accessible. The free tier was not a charity. It was a funnel. Today, Spotify has 713 million monthly active users. Roughly 239 million of them pay for premium. That means approximately 470 million people use Spotify for free, and the advertising they generate funds the experience that eventually converts a meaningful percentage of them to paying subscribers. The free tier is not a cost. It is an acquisition machine. No streaming service on earth has converted as many people from free to paid as Spotify. That conversion engine is what justifies the freemium model to the labels, because more premium subscribers means more royalties. Here is how the money actually flows, because it is more complex than most people realize. Spotify pays roughly 2/3 of every dollar it generates in music revenue to rights holders. Of that, approximately 80% goes to recording royalties, paid to labels, who then pay artists according to their individual contracts. 20% goes to publishing royalties, paid to songwriters and composers. The calculation is not a fixed per-stream rate. It is a pro-rata system. Each month, Spotify calculates what percentage of total streams each song represents. That percentage of the total royalty pool goes to the rights holder of that song. This means a song with 1% of all streams in a given month receives 1% of that month's royalty pool. The pool size depends on total subscriber and advertising revenue that month. In practice, this has created controversy. Major artists with massive stream counts receive enormous royalties. Independent artists with smaller audiences receive fractions of a cent per stream. Spotify's defense: the total pool has grown dramatically. In 2025, $11 billion went to rights holders. In 2006, the same music would have generated almost nothing because it was being pirated. For the labels that negotiated equity stakes in 2006, the answer is unambiguously yes. Here is the tension at the heart of Spotify's business that even its most successful years have not fully resolved. 2/3 of every dollar Spotify earns goes immediately to rights holders. That leaves roughly 1/3 to cover technology, employees, marketing, and profit. Spotify's gross margin in 2025 was approximately 31%. After operating expenses, the net margin has historically been razor-thin or negative, though the company has achieved profitability in recent quarters. Compare this to AWS at 35% operating margins, or Netflix's improving margins. Spotify is structurally disadvantaged because its primary cost is variable and directly tied to its primary revenue. Netflix can reduce content costs by canceling shows. Spotify cannot reduce music costs by removing songs. That would end the service. This is why Spotify has diversified aggressively into podcasts, audiobooks, and now AI features. Not because those are better businesses, but because they carry different cost structures. Spotify does not pay 2/3 of podcast revenue to the music labels. The long-term bet: if Spotify can shift enough of its listening time to non-music content, the blended margin improves. The music industry bet its future on Spotify. Spotify is now betting part of its future on not being only about music. The Spotify story is one of the most complex in modern business. A company that solved a massive industry problem, built an enormous platform, and still operates at structural disadvantage. The lessons are equally complex. Lesson 1. Sometimes the best deal is the one that prevents a worse outcome. The labels did not sign with Spotify because they thought it was a great deal. They signed because piracy was destroying them and nothing else was working. Genius was not offering an irresistible proposition. It was making the alternative look worse than the risk. In negotiation, the question is not, what do I want? It is, what does the other side fear most? Understanding that is the foundation of every successful deal. Lesson 2. Free can be a financial strategy, not a charity. Spotify's free tier was designed as a piracy replacement and a conversion funnel, not as a loss leader that the company hoped to eliminate. Understanding when free serves a financial function versus when it destroys a business is one of the most important distinctions in modern business models. Lesson 3. Structural cost disadvantages are the hardest problems in business. Spotify cannot reduce its primary cost without ending its business. This structural disadvantage means that even as Spotify grows, its margin expansion is limited in ways that most tech companies do not face. Before investing in or building a business, always understand, what is the primary cost? Can it be reduced, and who controls it? Lesson 4. Equity is often more valuable than royalties. The labels that negotiated equity stakes in Spotify in 2006 made more money from that equity than from a decade of royalties. Universal Music Group alone held approximately 5% of Spotify at IPO, worth billions. In any deal where you are providing something essential to a new business, the question, can I get equity instead of fees, is always worth asking. The royalty pays you for today. The equity pays you for everything that comes after. Spotify has over 700 million monthly users. It has paid $70 billion to the music industry. It has arguably saved recorded music from the trajectory piracy was putting it on, and yet, its profitability remains a work in progress. Its relationship with the labels remains a negotiation that never fully ends. Its margins are constrained in ways most platforms are not. Daniel Ek has announced he will step down as CEO. His co-founder has said the value of a company is the sum of all problems it has solved. Spotify solved the music industry's piracy problem. The question for the next chapter is whether it can solve its own. Subscribe to Founders and Fortunes. Every week we break down the business models and financial stories behind the companies you interact with every day. Next week, how Warren Buffett turned $100 into $90 billion. And the 3 rules he never broke. I'll see you there.